Point number 5, was Jesus crucified on the cross? Who was crucified on the cross? A Christian view. Jesus died on a cross according to God's plan as a full sacrifice and payment for our sins, symbolizing the animal sacrifice in the Old Testament for the redemption of the sins of the people. Christians believe that Jesus was truly crucified to fulfill his own word in Matthew 26:28. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Jesus' own words said this, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." The Bible has mentioned and predicted Jesus' death over and over, and it happened. It really happened. It would be also helpful for the Muslim to read Isaiah 53, 4-11, and see why God caused Jesus to die. Now, Muslim view. Muslims believe that the God of the Quran would not dishonor his chosen prophet by allowing him to be crucified. Muslims, therefore, deny that Jesus was crucified. They believe instead that he was caught up into heaven and that someone, say Judas, took his place on the cross. Rather than seeing the crucifixion as dishonoring Christ, Muslims should see it not only as resulting in the greatest honor, but also as manifesting the epitome of love for sinners. Consider the following. The word Islam means obedience, submission. And it is obedience to God that Jesus demonstrated all the way to the cross. Muslims should honor him such obedience. And the next question, why the cross? Jesus' sacrificial death and the Moses law. The atoning death of Christ must also be seen against the background of the Old Testament sacrificial system. Isaiah 53:6 describes this connection vividly, that the iniquity of sinners is to be transferred to the suffering servant Jesus. Just as in the Old Testament rites, the sin were transferred to the sacrificial animal. That was the way how the Israelites be forgiven of their sins, by the sacrificial blood of the animal. And this eventually represents how Jesus will die on the cross. And then Isaiah 53:6 says, "We all like a sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Sacrifices were offered to appease God. It should also be noted that a sacrifice was offered as a substitute for the sinner. It bore the sinner's guilt. The sacrificial animal had to be spotless, without blemish. So Old Testament sacrificial law requirements were fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Hebrews 9:12-29 describe this in detail. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. Now this passage describing why and how Jesus came to die on the cross and shed his blood for the forgiveness of sins of the people. Verse 10, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who were ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more than with the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. For this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. It was promised in the Old Testament, Leviticus, that the life is in the blood, so the blood redeems the people. There was a principle and there was a promise from the Old Testament. And that is the reason why Jesus had to shed his blood for the forgiveness of the sins of the people. 26. Then Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with the sin by the sacrifice of himself. And 27 is clearly says that just as man is destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, everyone is destined to die once and face judgment. Period. Nobody can avoid this. And 28. So Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of the many people, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. Christians through the ages have reviewed Islam as a distortion of both the Old and New Testament. A new interpretation of these books that significantly changed and constructed their teachings. Christians have not denied that there are excellent teachings in Islam. However, just as Muslims claim that both Jews and Christians corrupted the teachings of Moses and Jesus, Christians believe that the Quran is a corruption of the Old and New Testament that essentially robs the gospel of its power, because they changed many parts of the original Bible and then they teach in a totally different way, a distortion of the Bible message for the sake of their own doctrine in Islam. And argument number 1, Jesus did not die on the cross. The Islam claim this. But the answer, if Jesus did not die a violent and imminent death, then that makes him first prophet. But the Quran says that he is a great prophet, and so the Quran would be wrong and thus discredited. On the other hand, if Jesus did die a violent, imminent death, as he predicted, then he is indeed a great prophet, but this would contradict the Quran, which says he didn't die on the cross. So either way, the Quran is discredited. The most fundamental teaching of the Bible is that Christ did die upon the cross for sin of the world, and that this was God's plan from all eternity. Now, argument number 2. The crucifixion, Allah substituted somebody at the last minute on the cross. The Christian answer. They claim that Jesus was on the cross and Allah made him appear to be dead. That creates another problem. This would make Allah a deceiver, what seems to be the most rational belief. If you are not a Muslim who already is so predisposed to believing Islamic doctrine that you can look at the data objectively in any sense, no one would say that the Quran is a credible source when it comes to Jesus.